Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something honest. Have you ever laid awake at night, replaying every word, every text, every moment, just trying to figure out where you stand with someone? If you have, you're not alone. Because too many people confuse unpredictability with passion. Too many of us are conditioned to believe that confusion is just part of love, that if we're unsure, if we're constantly guessing, then it must mean we feel something real. But the truth is, love shouldn't leave you in emotional limbo. The person who is right for you won't make you chase clarity. They won't let silence answer the questions their honesty should. Tonight, I want to speak to the part of you that's tired of guessing. Tired of feeling like you're too much or not enough, or one wrong word away from being ignored. Because once you understand what real love looks like, you'll stop entertaining anything that makes you feel confused. Let's talk about why the right person doesn't leave you guessing. When someone pulls away from you, the natural instinct is to assume they're done, that the silence, the lack of effort, the emotional absence means they've moved on. But what most people don't understand is that distance doesn't always mean disinterest. In fact, obsession, real deep emotional fixation, often hides behind distance. It's not always in the texts, the calls, the chasing. Sometimes it's in the silence, the pause, the gap, the space between what was and what they're too afraid to face now. When a person feels deeply but doesn't know how to process those feelings, they often retreat. Not because they're numb, but because they are overwhelmed. They feel too much, and instead of confronting it, they pull away. They ghost, they vanish, they stop showing up, and you're left thinking they've lost feelings, that they're living their best life without a second thought of you. But you'd be surprised how often that distance is covering up a storm of emotions they don't want you, or even themselves, to see. Obsession doesn't always look like someone blowing up your phone or begging for you back. It's not always dramatic or visible. Sometimes it's quiet, secret. It's checking your stories without saying anything. It's watching your posts, zooming in on your photos, wondering who you're with, how you're doing, if you still think about them. They're not gone. They're just hiding. They're buried in their own fear, their own pride, their own need to stay in control, and so they create distance, hoping you'll come closer, hoping you'll do the emotional work they can't bring themselves to do. They tell themselves, if she reaches out, I still matter. If she's confused, I still have her attention. And so they stay silent, not because they've let go, but because they're still holding on, in a way that gives them power without vulnerability. They don't want to be the one to break. They don't want to be the one to look weak, so they wear distance like armor, but underneath that space, they're constantly thinking about what they didn't say, what they didn't do, and whether or not you've started to move on without them. This kind of emotional obsession is rooted in fear, the fear of rejection, the fear of not being enough, the fear that even if they showed up, they'd still lose you, so they take the safest route: withdrawal. Distance feels safer than honesty. It's easier to stay away and wonder than to show up and be exposed. To speak would be to admit care. To try would be to risk failure. And for many people, emotional paralysis is easier than facing their truth. But make no mistake, just because they've disappeared doesn't mean they've detached. In fact, the more intense the feelings, the more likely someone is to run. It's ironic, but real. The people who feel the most can often be the ones who go the quietest. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much and don't know how to manage it. Obsession doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like avoidance, like distance, like pretending everything's fine while constantly checking their phone to see if you've reached out. And when they see you moving on, or even looking like you're healing, it bothers them, but they won't say it. They'll just scroll quietly, feeling the weight of their own decisions, feeling the regret creep in, feeling the obsession they tried to hide coming back stronger now that they're on the outside. But they won't always take action, because obsession without courage stays silent. It lingers, it watches. It plays games in the shadows. Distance is their comfort zone. It gives them the illusion of control, but what it really reveals is emotional immaturity. When someone chooses distance instead of dialogue, when they step away instead of stepping up, it doesn't always mean they're done. It means they're stuck, torn between how they feel and what they're willing to risk, and so the obsession sits there, unspoken, unresolved, burning quietly behind a wall of silence. What you see on the outside, coldness, indifference, space, is often the opposite of what's really going on. Obsession has many disguises. It doesn't always chase. Sometimes it hides, and the harder it hides, the deeper it runs. There's a common belief that when someone goes silent, they're done, that their absence, their quiet, their emotional withdrawal is the clearest sign they've moved on. And yes, sometimes that's true, but not always. Silence is a complicated thing. It's not always a full stop. Sometimes it's a pause laced with fear, confusion, pride, or emotional chaos. When someone disappears without closure, without explanation, our minds rush to the conclusion that they've simply stopped caring, that the love meant nothing, that we were easier to forget than we imagined. But silence can mean so much more than indifference. Often, silence comes not from a place of peace, but from conflict, internal conflict. When a person doesn't know how to deal with their own feelings, when they're battling insecurity, guilt, or even obsession, they might pull back, not because they've let go, but because they don't know how to hold on. They're overwhelmed by feelings they don't know how to express, and rather than open that door, rather than speak with honesty or admit to vulnerability, they hide behind silence. It becomes their way of coping. It's a power move, too. Silence leaves you guessing. It puts the emotional burden on you. You start questioning everything. Was it something I said? Did I push too hard? Is he trying to move on, or does he want me to reach out first? You overanalyze every interaction, every last text, every moment where things felt right. His silence becomes a mirror reflecting your doubts instead of his truth, and that's exactly why silence can be a tool of control. Because when someone is still emotionally attached but doesn't want to show their hand, they'll let silence do the work for them. They'll let you stew, wonder, spiral, just enough to hope you'll be the one to break first. Silence, in many cases, is about ego. He wants to know you still care without having to be the one to make a move. He wants reassurance that he still has emotional influence, because if you're the one to reach out, if you're the one to ask, "Are we okay?" or "Why did you disappear?" then he wins. He gets the confirmation that even in his absence he still matters, that his presence is still needed, and so he stays quiet, not because he's done, but because he's trying to measure just how done you are. But what complicates this further is that some people confuse silence with strength. They think that by staying quiet, they're protecting themselves or appearing composed. But the truth is, it's often just fear in disguise. Fear of rejection, fear of not being good enough, fear that if they do reach out, it will expose how deeply they still care. And sometimes they fear that caring is a weakness. So instead of leaning into their feelings, they bury them in silence. It's easier than being honest, easier than admitting they're still hurt, still confused, still attached. You might think his silence is him moving on, but while you're trying to let go, he could be quietly watching, waiting, wondering what you're thinking. You post something on social media and he sees it, maybe even saves it. He checks your profile at midnight, but never likes, never comments, never texts. He plays invisible observer because he wants to stay connected without showing up. That's not disinterest, that's obsession with boundaries. He's still emotionally involved, but he's too proud or too afraid to engage, so instead he pretends to be silent, hoping you'll break the tension. It's this kind of silence that's the hardest to interpret. It's not clean, it's not direct. It's a silence that demands attention while denying responsibility. It says, I want you to care, but I'm not going to make it easy. And this kind of behavior isn't about love, it's about emotional manipulation. Because silence, when used as a tool, keeps the power on one side and leaves the other person chasing answers. It's emotional limbo. And when you're on the receiving end of it, it's painful, confusing, exhausting. You're not just grieving the person, you're grieving the lack of clarity. But again, silence doesn't always mean someone has moved on. In fact, sometimes it means they're stuck, trapped in their own head, wrestling with feelings they haven't processed, wanting to reach out but unsure of how to navigate the aftermath of whatever happened between you. Their silence is their shield. Their silence is their way of saying, I still care, but I don't know what to do with that care. And that's the most frustrating part, because while you're looking for closure, clarity, or honesty, they're hiding in a space where none of that exists. Not because they've forgotten you, but because they remember everything too clearly, and they haven't found the courage to deal with it out loud, so they stay quiet and hope that somehow the silence will speak for them. When someone cares about you, you expect to feel it, not just in words, but in presence, in consistency, in action. And when they go silent, when they choose not to respond, when they withhold communication, you're left not only confused, but emotionally starved. What hurts the most isn't just the silence itself. It's the fact that someone who once showed up, who once paid attention, now uses that very absence as a form of power. That's where the real damage happens. Because silence, when done with intention, isn't love, it's control. People don't always go quiet because they need space. They go quiet to make you feel something: confusion, guilt, anxiety. They go silent to shift the emotional weight onto you, to put you in a place where you begin second, guessing your actions, your words, and even your worth. And the most toxic part, you start blaming yourself for the silence. You wonder what you did wrong. Was I too much? Was I too distant? Should I have handled that moment differently? That's exactly how silence as a control tactic works. It makes you the one chasing clarity, even when you did nothing to deserve the fog. When someone is silent with the intention of punishing you, they're not seeking peace, they're seeking power. They want to see if you'll reach out. They want to see if you'll apologize for something you didn't do. They want to feel like they matter so much to you that even their absence becomes a statement. It's not just a lack of communication, it's a test, and this test is cruel because it places all the emotional pressure on your side while they sit back and watch how much you'll bend. What makes it more painful is that it doesn't feel like abuse. Silence doesn't come with shouting or name calling. It's quiet, subtle, and invisible to everyone else. So when you try to explain that it's hurting you, people don't always get it. They say maybe he's busy, maybe he needs space, maybe you're overthinking, but what they don't see is the pattern. How the silence only happens when he doesn't get his way, how it always follows conflict, how it seems to be his go-to response whenever things get emotionally real. That's not space, that's manipulation, and what keeps you trapped is the hope that the silence will end with something meaningful. Maybe he'll come back with an apology, maybe he'll have realized your worth. But most of the time, when silence is used as control, the return is just another round of emotional confusion, because it's not about resolving anything, it's about maintaining dominance. As long as he can use silence to make you chase, question, or fold, he doesn't have to be vulnerable. He doesn't have to take responsibility. He doesn't have to grow. There's a difference between healthy space and calculated silence. Healthy space is communicated. It says, I need time, but I still care. I'll come back and we'll talk. Controlled, riven silence says nothing. It disappears, letting you sit in discomfort. It forces you to be the emotional caretaker while he gets to be emotionally absent. It's a power imbalance disguised as emotional distance. And here's what makes it even more damaging. Silence distorts your sense of self. You start feeling like you're needy just for wanting communication, like you're too emotional for wanting resolution. You begin adjusting yourself to fit into the tiny space he leaves you in. You silence yourself in response to his silence. And that's how control works. It doesn't need words. It just needs you to question yourself enough that you stop asking for more. What's hardest is walking away from someone who doesn't yell, doesn't insult, but just leaves you hanging. Because it doesn't feel like mistreatment, but that's the quiet danger. Silence is easy to justify. It's easy to minimize. But when silence becomes a pattern, a punishment, a tactic, it's not love anymore. It's emotional manipulation wrapped in distance. Love doesn't leave you in the dark. It doesn't use withdrawal as leverage. It doesn't make you beg for answers. It doesn't confuse consistency with control. Silence, when used to control, isn't about connection. It's about dominance. It's about making you feel small so the other person can feel powerful. One of the biggest lies we've been conditioned to believe is that confusion is part of love. That if you're constantly overthinking, constantly questioning, constantly unsure, then it must be passion. But real love doesn't feel like anxiety. It doesn't feel like trying to decode someone's behavior every day. The right person doesn't leave you guessing. They don't leave you hanging between assumptions and hopes. They don't make you work for crumbs of reassurance when all you're asking for is clarity. When someone truly cares about you, their actions align with their words. They don't tell you they miss you, then disappear for days. They don't say you matter, then treat you like an option. The right person shows up, not just once, not just when it's convenient, but consistently. They don't make you feel like you're chasing them. They meet you halfway. You're not left rereading messages or replaying conversations in your mind just to figure out where you stand. The wrong people thrive on ambiguity. They rely on the fact that your heart is big enough to wait. They keep things undefined, vague, and open-ended, not because they are still figuring things out, but because keeping you uncertain gives them control. As long as you're unsure, you stay emotionally invested. You keep showing up. You keep proving yourself. That guessing game becomes a trap you don't even realize you're in until it starts exhausting you. But the right person doesn't need you to perform. They don't need you to over-explain your worth. They already see it. They don't need silence to feel powerful. They don't use distance as a weapon. They speak when something's wrong. They listen when something matters. They care enough not to let you spiral with questions you should never have had to ask in the first place. So let me leave you with this. The right person won't leave you refreshing your messages second, guessing your worth, or questioning where you stand. They won't make you feel like love is a puzzle you have to solve, because real connection brings clarity, not confusion, consistency, not chaos, and peace, not panic. If someone truly wants you in their life, they will make it known, not through grand speeches, but through quiet, steady effort. They will speak when it matters. They will show up when it's hard, and they will never, ever let you live in a space where love feels uncertain. So stop settling for almost. Stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's silence. You deserve to feel secure, wanted, and sure of where you stand, and anyone who makes you guess is showing you they're not the one. Thank you.